I have a question.
Please go ahead.
Dr. Bede, you say that presumed consent means that the people don't have the opportunity to opt out. Is that what you're saying?
No.
Okay, tell me what you mean by that.
I'm saying that the default position is that everybody is a donor unless they choose to opt out. And so part of developing a presumed consent model would be that you would develop an opt-out registry or a mechanism that would allow families to opt out.
But the word presumed in law generally means that their presumption is rebuttable. In other words, the presumption isn't all-encompassing. What it means is that a person can decide against that presumption and decide that he or she will not be a part of the program.
Which would be well respected because we would have developed an opt-out registry as part of our system.
Yeah.
So you're right, it would have to include that opportunity.
So you're in favor of presumed consent as long as a person has the democratic right to rebut that presumption by opting out?
If we were to adopt that system, I absolutely agree that that would have to be a component. I wouldn't go there yet. I think that there's other parts of the donation system that will require our attention as a higher priority item. But if we deal with those things and we're still looking at ways to fine-tune system performance and presumed consent gets back to the table, include a well-defined opt-out mechanism.
So you're really telling us that we as a society are not well informed at this stage to reach to that position where we ought to adopt the principle of presumed consent.
I think that's true to some extent.
So we need to be better informed.
There's no question that the public and the healthcare community need to be better informed.
Okay, so what happens if governments adopt a massive advertising campaign across the country and tell the public the benefits of presumed consent? And you've already told us that in some parts of the world there's a 30% increase in donors where we have presumed consent.
Yes.
So if the governments and public interest bodies get involved in a massive advertising campaign telling the public of the benefits, not only individually, but as a whole, the benefits of presumed consent, you'd be in favor of it?
No. I think what I would say is that that kind of support to educate the public and the healthcare community at large about the benefits of donation would be my priority. And in the context of supporting donation, we don't even need to address presumed consent. I think if we never even got there, we would find that many more potential donors are identified and referred, and that ultimately that would increase the number of donors much more effectively than the number that would be presumed to be consented. And the reason I say that is because the regionalization of our healthcare system. We have a huge number of people who are being cared for in relatively small peripheral centers, and that's not where donation and transplantation occurs. So the system as a whole probably works pretty well in the academic centers where people are up to speed, but collectively across this country, there's a huge number of people outside those centers who are not well informed. So a potential donor in a peripheral hospital isn't even recognized as or identified as a donor by the healthcare team, and so the transplant center never even knew they existed. That's the problem.
So your argument basically is that not enough people understand the concept and the ramifications of presumed consent, therefore we should not go there at this stage.
That would be a component of my rebuttal, but it wouldn't be the core argument.
Okay. You don't disagree with the evidence that we've heard here today that it's clearly beneficial not only to the recipient but to society at large that there ought to be more transplants as opposed to dialysis?
Absolutely, completely 100% agree that we need to increase donation. Right. Absolutely.
So the question now is, how do we get there?
Absolutely, and
All right.
that's my point.
Okay. Anybody else?
Here's a simple one. Is the current state for the donor, no matter whether they've said they want to donate or not, that the family are the ones that make that decision for them?
Yes, I think the new law in Nova Scotia, here I'm going to get in trouble for this, but the new law says that first person consent, i.e. you register, is binding consent. In a practical sense, I don't think doctors are going to listen to that. So the bottom line, in spite of what the law says, is that clinicians at the bedside are absolutely going to listen to what the family have to say. That's what they do now, and that's what they're going to continue to do. There are some places, especially in some of the big OPOs in the States, where they don't do that. Mr. Smith said he was going to be a donor. He's in the ICU. He's declared. His family say, wait a second, don't do it. And the OPO says, I'm sorry you disagree. We're doing it anyway. That's uncommon. It does happen in some places. It doesn't happen in Canada, to my knowledge.
Dr. Bede, Ken Merkley. A little bit different in British Columbia. The Human Tissue and Organ Donor Act says the individual's rights are to be respected. When the family goes against that, theoretically, they're breaking the law. What we do in BC is respect that family's wishes, but in fact, every time we do it, we're breaking the law.
You're right, and that's what happens now, and that's why I think I'm going to get in trouble for saying what I just did. Because the dynamic at the bedside is hard to appreciate if you haven't been there. It's the vast majority of donors have suffered a sudden catastrophic illness. Through the eyes of their family, they were fine at breakfast that morning. They were great. They weren't suffering from 6 or 12 months of a chronic illness. They were fine, and then they had a car accident, or then they had an aneurysm in their head go, or then they had a cardiac arrest. So these families are being given the worst news you can imagine, and they are exhausted, and they're distressed, and the physicians who have to deal with them may not be aware of how to deal with this situation, because in most places it's a rare event. If you look at the donor rate, in Canada, 15 per million, the vast majority of physicians in smaller centers that have to deal with a potential donor will do so less than once per year. And that makes it very difficult for them to be good at it. And when you have a really distressed family, it makes it a challenge. That's why, to some extent, the investment in the critical care community is key to success. In the ICU, unfortunately, we deal with patients and families in distress every day. We talk about dying patients every day. And right or wrong, there's a certain comfort level with that. There's a point that a donor mom in Nova Scotia makes, which is crucial. When somebody dies in this circumstance, we're scared to ask the question. It's the only question anybody can ask that has any hope of healing. Did he have a will? Who's going to be the pallbearers? What hymns are at the, all those questions get asked, and all they are is torture. The only question that has any hope to heal is, would they want to help somebody by being a donor? But many, many, many healthcare professionals don't understand that. They don't make the approach. They don't identify the donor. They don't refer them to the centers that can deal with this. That's a big part of the Canadian problem. And I think they had time.
I'll just ask one little question on that. If that's the case, why don't they just tell them medical school?
It's starting to happen, but historically, donation and transplantation was not covered in medical school or nursing school. In the last 5 or 10 years at Dal, we've integrated into our residency training program. So there's going to be a new generation that at least heard about it, but most of the healthcare people in your communities have had no education except if by anecdote they got exposed and got informed.
We're just going to take a... We'll We'll just take one last question from the audience because of time constraints. Did I see a hand up?
I was going to say that I think in BC we are perhaps more informed of that and we have more enthusiasm behind transplantation. I'm a nurse at the University of Victoria in the School of Nursing, and certainly this is something that we are very much behind. My husband passed away 2 years ago from long-standing kidney disease and chronic kidney problems for most of his life. And I think that because of the community and because of the leadership of the BC Kidney Foundation, that we are making advances. So much so that we would like to have a challenge across Canada, and maybe you could be our Nova Scotia contact, where we would look at medical schools and nursing schools across Canada doing a competition as to how many people we could get to be signed up as organ donors. And in that process, they would be the advocates for informing people about transplantation, about organ registry and that kind of thing. So, and in addition to that, that as a bonus to the school that would be signing up the most, they would be recipients of a scholarship. My husband set up a fundraiser called Kidneys on the Move, and every year we've raised approximately $5,000 at each event. So over the course of 10 years, that's close to $82,000. Well, I would challenge other communities to get involved and to use that medical and that nursing knowledge in those ways, and that's how we could work together to bring Canada signing up for organ donation.
I would agree. And in the last 5 to 10 years, I think this message has gotten through to the curriculum of nursing and medical schools. But most of the practitioners out there who graduated, say, 10 to 15 years or more, have had no or almost no formal education on this. And the new generation will, the older generation didn't.
Thank you, everyone, for such a very lively session. I'd like to especially thank our two speakers today, Dr. Bede and Joel, and ask you to come up and accept a small token of our appreciation.